And hello and welcome back. What a great morning and what a great day. And we're going to start off with such a treat this morning. As with all of our work, we tried to start with a theological grounding, and that's how we're starting this morning after that just powerful worship. Our first plenary is I Am Her in the Bible. We have for you gathered an outstanding group of lay and clergy women from across the church and other faiths who will share with you women in the Bible who inspire them. This panel will be facilitated by Bishop Sally Dyck. Bishop Dyck is the bishop in residence for the Northern Illinois Annual Conference. She serves as the ecumenical officer of the Council of Bishops and presently leads the General Board of Church and Society as its president. Thank you, Bishop Dyck, and take it away.
All right. Well, it's wonderful to be finally here at the I Am Her Women's Leadership. And I was found that Bishop Malone's sermon was amazing, and is poetry and prophecy and preaching all at the same time. Thank you, my friend. And we have this panel this morning of wonderful people, the women who are from all over the country. Part of this was inspired because some of us are in a Bible study with some Jewish friends and Christian and Jewish women studying women of the Bible. And so Dawn thought it might be an interesting panel to ask several women what biblical woman they relate to. And so that's what we have this morning. They'll each give a few minutes in terms of the woman they chose. So first I want to just introduce the panel. I'll just call your name, and if you would just say your name and where you live and your context of ministry or outreach. Juyeon Jeon, welcome.
Hello, my name is Julian Zhang, and I'm a pastor at Genoa Faith United Methodist Church and Northern Illinois Conference. And I became a provisional elder in 2016, and now I'm serving a beautiful congregation in a small town, Genoa, Illinois. And it is my privilege and to be part of this Bible study and to share my story as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kim Simpson.
Hello, I'm Kim Simpson. I live in Arlington, Texas. I am Native American and a lay woman. I am part of the Central Texas Conference, and I have served the church on almost every level that there is. Right now, I am part of the Board of Directors for Discipleship Ministries General Agency, and I serve as chair of the Commission on the General Conference. And I'm happy to be here today.
Yes, we're glad to have you. And Alice Williams.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alice Williams. I'm part of the Florida Annual Conference, and I am laity. And I have just recently had the blessing to be elected as our conference lay leader.
Great. Denise Smartt-Sears.
Good afternoon. I'm Denise Smartt-Sears, and I'm the District Superintendent of the Metropolitan District in the New York Conference, and I'm thankful to be with you today.
And then Dale Ginsburg, who is one of our Jewish friends.
I'm Dale Ginsburg. I'm a board member of the American Jewish Committee. I live in Chicago, which is where I met Bishop Dyck and Dawn, and we have participated in this wonderful dialogue of studying women in the Bible together, and I am delighted to be here today to do this again. Thank you.
I'm glad to have you. And Nathalie Parker.
Thank you, Bishop, and I'm so excited to participate with all these amazing women. I am Nathalie Parker, Provisional Elder from the North Georgia Conference, and I am serving as the Program Coordinator for the National Network of Young Adults, which is an initiative of strengthening the Black Church for the 21st century, housed at Discipleship Ministries in Nashville, Tennessee.
So welcome to all of you. And I believe so strongly that when we study scripture together, we really are able to have a deep conversation about important things like faith and life, conflict, forgiveness, love, all that and more as we share the scriptures. I think that we often find the scriptures context may be in an ancient time, but it's amazing how the constants of human life and faith transcend that time. So I've asked each one of these women to choose a woman from the Bible, say a bit about her and the context of the time in which she lived, and why she selected her, how she connects with your life, your faith, and what does she have to say to women today. So I'm going to begin with Juyeon Jeon.
Hi again, my name is Julian Zhang. She, her. It's good to be here. I chose Mary, the sister of Martha, and also another name for her is Mary of Bethany. There are many women's stories that I take lessons from, but Mary is the one I can say I am her. And I hope and pray that the story of both Mary and me would be a message of hope and healing. Mary's name appears in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, also the Gospel of John, chapter 11 and 12. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, 38, 42 to 42, Jesus visits his dear friend's house, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, their siblings. While Martha is busy cooking in the kitchen, Mary does not do anything. She's just quietly sitting at Jesus' feet and listens to his words. And Martha was angry that her little sister does not do anything. So instead of speaking directly to her, maybe, she spoke to her sister Mary, but, Mary did not listen. I don't know. But, finally, Martha complains to Jesus. Jesus, don't you care that my sister has left me to prepare the table all by myself? Tell her to help me. And Jesus says, whoa, Martha, take it easy. You're distracted by many things. One thing is necessary. And Mary has chosen the better part. It won't be taken away from her. And this is the end of the story. Well, in this story, there are so many lessons we can take away and different perspectives to read Martha and Mary, like, devotion versus service. But what is interesting to me is that Mary does not say or speak any words in here. Even another account of Mary and Martha after Lazarus' death, she is just weeping, no words here. And when she anoints Jesus, she silently comes to a place and anoints Jesus. No words of Mary. She is silent in these passages, but she acts and moves. Sitting at Jesus' feet was supposedly a man's role at the time, and Mary was taking what men would do at the time. And she was supposed to help her sister in the preparation of meal, and she neglected that duty. And Mary is violating a clear social boundary. She's humiliating her house. To me, Mary, though she was silent, in this story, she was speaking very strongly by her presence among men. And I'm sure she heard people gossiping and criticizing her, but she endured the uncomfortable silence, awkward atmosphere. Her countercultural action made many people uncomfortable, and she fully, with her whole body and mind, fills the air. Everybody was pointing at her and giving her that look and saying, "What are you doing here? You are not supposed to do that. You're a woman, you don't belong here." She might seem like a selfish little sister who is immature or neglecting her duty, but she had an unshakable heart for listening to the teachings of Jesus. To me, she was a silent protester. Let me share a little bit of my background. I was born and raised in South Korea, and I grew up in a conservative church. My family has been devoted Christians. From a very, very early and young age, I felt called to ministry and mission. And I did not know what it was at the time, but my heart was fired on God's mission and ministry. But no one ever encouraged me to be a pastor. Well, since I studied theology in college, my life got in trouble. I can't read the Bible as I was taught, and things became uncomfortable around me because now I had the eyes to see what is wrong and what is right with my own perspective. There were many places that I had to fight for my rights as a woman, even in the church. To dream to be a pastor, you'd either to be a 기센여자 in Korean, which is a negative connotation for a strong woman, or has to have an extraordinary spiritual gift. And this was a norm that was imposed to women in ministry from my particular context. Nevertheless, I pursued to be a pastor, and I followed the voice from my deepest heart. And just like Mary, I chose what is better for me. And step by step, I followed the heart that no one can take away. I silently respond to God's call and God's work. And I wanted to start my ordination process actually 15 years ago in Korea. And at the time, I was working as a student pastor in a quite big church and needed approval from the lead pastor to start the process. And there were two other student pastors who wanted also to start the process, same process. Of course, they were male, and three of us all came to the lead pastor with the same matter. And the lead pastor, he was in his 60s at the time, and happily encouraged the other male pastors to start their process without questions. But he said to me, Juyeon, why do you want to be a pastor? Woman cannot be a pastor. If you really want to do ministry, just be a pastor's wife. This is not for women. And I left the church. And I silently walked my path following God's call. One day there was also a gathering of Korean pastors and spouses, and all pastors were men except me at that particular meeting. When this type of gathering, normally, male pastors gather around the couch and chairs talking about church and ministry and Bible, etc. And spouses, usually women's group, gather around the dining table and kitchen, preparing a meal or treats. And as a woman pastor, many times struggle where to sit. I still remember that particular gathering that I chose to sit among other pastors, even though I was supposed to help other women from that given context. I was like Mary, just withstood the unspoken scolding. I might seem rude, unrespectful, immature, but I silently stood that silence. I, like Mary, endured the uncomfortable atmosphere. When people say you are supposed to be in the kitchen, I silently remain where I believe I'm called to. When people say you don't belong here, you're supposed to be a pastor in your own country, your home country, I silently remain where I believe I'm called to be. When people name me like petite, young, nice Korean pastor, regardless, I walk my path, anointing God's beloved people, and try to touch their feet in humble service and weep with those who are weeping. Mary is speaking to me and you, encouraging you to be confident where you're called. When people say you don't belong here, God says, yes, you belong here. When people say you're not supposed to do that, Jesus says, leave her alone. Women, prepare my way. Do what is better. Do what you could do for the kingdom building with all your strength. Don't be apologetic. No one can take away from you. Stay still and walk your way, just like Mary, regardless. Be you and keep going where you're called. And this is the story that I take away from Mary's story. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I grew up in such a totally different environment, church environment from Juyeon, but I totally related to her story. and I'm sure that some of you did too. I'm going to call on Kim Simpson, and she will present her woman from the Bible.
Hello. This morning, I have chosen to identify with Esther. Esther has a whole book in the Bible dedicated to her. But who was Esther? Her parents were Jews who were exiled to Babylon, and they died when she was very young. Her uncle Mordecai raised her, and they lived in about 483 BC in Susa in the Persian Empire. King Xerxes at the time was looking for a new queen, and he wanted to choose from beautiful young virgins in the empire. He chose to have Esther as part of those candidates. But her uncle Mordecai told her not to tell anyone that she was Jewish. Well, long story short, Esther became queen of Persia. And everything was fine until a dangerous situation came about with Haman, who was second in command to the king. He issued a decree for all the Jews to be killed. Mordecai went to Queen Esther and said, "This may be why you are queen. You need to go before the king and plead for the Jews." And he said, "If you don't help, help will come from somewhere else. But who knows that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this?" Esther put herself before the king, and eventually the king listened to her and the Jews were saved. When I stepped in to be chair of the Commission on General Conference about a year ago, words were said to me over and over. "You have come to this position for such a time as this." When people discovered that I was the new chair, they told me that over and over. And about 9 months, the General Conference was supposed to happen and everything was going to be fine. Then the protocol for reconciliation was introduced and things became a little more interesting. And after that, COVID hit and things became really challenging. We had to postpone General Conference. And I thought, who am I to lead in these unprecedented times? Who am I to be chosen to lead now? Me, a laywoman, a person who's not paid, a volunteer in this position. I came to think back over my life and I could see other places where I had been put in leadership positions and had to make hard decisions. It always started with me being willing to open myself to opportunities for God to use me, to work through me. I didn't really go looking for opportunities. They just seemed to find me. And the year that Queen Esther prepared to be queen, I sort of correlated to the many different positions I have had through the years of leadership to bring me to where I am today. Esther prepared and left the rest up to God. And she humbled herself. She knew it was not about her, but it was about what she is being asked to do. And the first thing I do when I come across a situation where I'm unsure is to pray. I ask for guidance and for help and for strength. And my children will come to me for advice. And the first thing they'll tell you I say is, "Have you prayed?" And they say, "Yes, Mom, we've prayed, but now we need some help. We need some guidance." So that's how my service for the church has been. It's never been about me. It's been about what God can accomplish through me, how he can use me to bring about glory for him and to achieve his purpose. When Esther was considering what to do and how to go before the king, she prepared herself. She asked the Jews to fast, and she fasted. She asked them to help her be brave. She got advice from other people. She looked at it from different angles. And then, when she thought the time was right, she went before the king. I think she's shown us that we need to lay proper groundwork when we're in front of a big, daunting task. We need to surround us with people of different persuasions than us, different viewpoints, those that have different knowledge, and glean from that, listen to that, pray about it, and then when it's right, God will guide us to make the proper decisions. Esther has shown that there are a lot of things that we can use from what she modeled for us. Some of the takeaways, I think, are that we need to use the God-given opportunities that come before us. No opportunity is too small not to be important. You know, God can use little things to help with bigger things. All the small opportunities you have could be getting you ready for something that's greater down the road. And God can use the least to accomplish mighty things. Let's look at Esther. She was an orphan. She was in a land that wasn't familiar to her. She was Jewish. She was a minority. But God used her to save a whole race of people. If God can use Esther, he can use us. We just have to be willing to be brave in the midst of the battles for God to use us. But I think if God calls us, he will equip us. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy because we grow through our adversities. We don't grow through our complacencies. And we need to let God help us supply the resources. If God has called us, he will help us to supply those resources to get us through those situations. You know, God shows us also that he can intervene through the natural events in happening in our lives. That's called God's sovereignty. But he allows us to make the decisions, which shows we have free will. God can take bad situations and work them for good. God can take pain and transform it into joy. You know, God is never mentioned in the book of Esther, but his fingerprints are all over what happens in that book. And God's fingerprints are all over us too. He has put us in places where he can use us for his glory and to accomplish his plans. I have very seldom felt ready for a job God has called me to, but someone has seen something in me that made them think I could accomplish the task. Are you being called for something you feel inadequate? Are you willing to let God grow you outside your comfort zone and lead you to something better? Are you, like Esther, being called for such a time as this? I can truly say I have never been sorry for allowing myself to be used in service to God in the church and outside the church. Through these opportunities, I have found blessings and fullness of life. And I pray God will lead you to those opportunities where you will find blessings and fullness of life also. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I see 323 participants, and I'm just going to guess that 323 people could relate to being challenged to do something that they felt was way beyond them. And so we appreciate your testimony about how Esther's is a support to you even during the work you're doing now. I want to just say that if you have questions that you would like to ask one of the panelists, you can begin to put them in the chat. We hope that we have enough time at the end to do some questions. So go ahead and begin to put those in. Now I'm going to turn to Alice Williams, and she'll talk about the woman from the Bible that speaks to her.
Thank you, Bishop. It's a joy to be with you all today. And the person that I chose is Lydia. And it's a very, very short story in the Bible. It's in the book of Acts. And it's Acts 16, verses 11 through 16. And she was this amazing woman, epic girl boss, someone who managed to be in a place at a time that only God would know and only God could use. Let me just tell you a little bit about the story. This is taking place during the second of Paul's journeys. And the timing of this is about 50 years after Christ has died. Now, Paul was accompanied on this trip by some pretty cool people. He had Silas, Timothy, and most likely Luke with him. And this was the first trip that Paul made to what we know as Europe. After having been told by the Holy Spirit where not to go, he had been given this vision of the Macedonian man saying, come to Macedonia, come help us, come help us. So, Paul, who's already had a few amazing visions and experiences, he knows to listen when the Holy Spirit talks to him that way. So off they go. And so the Fab Four show up in Macedonia, and one of the places that they come to is the town of Philippi, a Roman colony of about 2,000 people at the time. I want to talk just a little bit about Philippi because it's important to have the context here, because I think that lends to the story. It was located off of the Via Egnatia. If you want to drop that at a cocktail party or something, that makes you sound really cool, which was one of the Roman superhighways. Remember the saying that all roads lead to Rome? There was a reason for that. The Romans had built some major roads, trails, whatever you want to call them, pathways for travel. And they were really good at it. And these became very much used trade routes. Now, because Philippi was located on this trade route, it had been a place of commerce for many years. And it had one other thing going for it. It had the distinction of having gold mines. There was gold in them there hills that were located just outside of Philippi. So we can imagine that there was a fair amount of wealth that came and went and traveled through that area. So it's not surprising that Philippi would have had kind of a bustling, maybe cosmopolitan kind of feel to it. And my guess is that it had several key trades that would have come through there. Likely one of those would have been renowned garment district kind of a place, because Rome, with a lot of the synods and the things that they did there, required that people dressed well, right? So they had to have some place to go. And with exotic fabrics and dyes that would have come through the world, they likely would have made their way here through Philippi. So I can imagine in my mind that this was a place of commerce, and it was a place where savvy business people would have done well. And so it is here in Philippi that on the Sabbath, Paul and his best friends go to a riverbank for a place of prayer. Now, what you see on the screen right now is something that just really hits me, because I started out working for a mouse. I was with the Disney organization for about 30 years. And one of my first jobs there was in retail. And I had the great good fortune of being able to engage in some pretty high-end clothing and that kind of thing that at the time we were vendors for. That slide that you saw the shells and you saw the actual bolts of cloth that were there. It took almost 200,000 of those Murex shells to make 2 to 3 ounces of dye. So this was something that was very, very valuable, right? They would say that often the denarii of silver and stuff, that if it was really good Tyrium purple dye, that would bring in enough for a household to live for multiple years. So this was a place where Lydia would have found herself meeting people from all over the world, coming through on this trade route. And she would have been exposed to a lot of different things, including a lot of different religions and understandings and philosophies. So I want to believe that Lydia was one of these people who was probably a fairly knowledgeable woman. We don't know if she was married or not. We think, at least the best that I've been able to ascertain from the reading that I've done, is that she may have been widowed. And the reason that we say that is because she had her own household. She was still running her own business. And this was still very, very much a male-dominated society that she was in. She was not Jewish, but she believed in one God, and she was very influenced by the Jews who did live in Philippi. As a matter of fact, she would find herself often going and talking with the women and hearing their prayers and understanding what their religion was. And she was very attracted to that. So here on this Sabbath, Paul and his new BFFs go to the riverbank where they thought there might be a place for prayer. And they found a Gentile God worshiper by the name of Lydia there, who was the purveyor of purple cloth. Now, this is even pretty cool too, because we wouldn't know that Lydia was necessarily a Gentile, but what we would know is that she wanted to have something longing in her fulfilled. I love this picture because I think it depicts, for as little as we know about Lydia, to me it tells the whole story. She is the woman who had the purple cloth. She is the woman who understood what it was to be in a business world. And she is a woman who knew that if she could find what she was longing for, she would be fulfilled. I want you to remember that face that you see there, or the absence of that face, because I think it becomes important to us. So Paul, who, by the way, was not the biggest of feminists, right? I mean, Paul came from a very, very strong Jewish background. There was not a lot of feminist lead in his life, right? But it's here that he meets Lydia, and he recognizes in her that she is unusual, that because of her status, her influence in the community, whatever it was, he sees something in her, and he notices that she is hearing the gospel message that he and the Fab Four are sharing. Once she's heard that message, she says to Paul, I get this. I understand this. I believe this. And she asks to be baptized. And not only she, but she wants her entire household baptized, which Paul does. And once that's happened, she turns to Paul, and it's in the scripture, and she says, now that you've decided that I'm a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house. And they did. And so for the next few days, and we don't know exactly how many, the Fab Four goes home with her, stays at her house, and I'm guessing, if I had any insight into Lydia, that she probably questioned them and picked their brains and just tried to soak up as much knowledge as she could from them and understanding about this faith that she was new to. Now, after they've stayed with Lydia, Paul goes on, gets himself into a little bit of trouble. This is where he gets into jail for casting out a demon out of a soothsayer. And the jailer, hears the earthquake and decides and believes. So there's some miraculous stuff that happens. But it's what goes on with Lydia that just intrigues me. Because after all that's happened and after Paul has moved on, Lydia, her household, and the people around her begin to share the gospel message. And they become the first prayer meetings. They become the first place of gathering. They become the first church in Europe. Now think about that. Get your head around that. Because what rose from that? Well, there's Eastern Orthodox, there's the Catholic Church, and then out of that become after the Reformation, the Protestant denominations. They all trace back to that moment. Now, what is it that I like most about Lydia? I think that's the fact that she overcame obstacles. I can't imagine what it would have been to have been a woman in such a male-dominated society. And to do it successfully and to be able to, my word, appeal to all the varying types of people, very high-end, probably those who were laborers or low-end. She would have had to have dealt with them all, and she would have had to have done it very well. She did have this stigma of not having, or at least we hear, that there wasn't a man in the picture per se, right? Because it was to her house, and she was the businesswoman. So whatever that was, whether she was widowed, whether perhaps she was divorced, whether she had been a slave at some point, whatever that was, that didn't hold her back. She didn't She didn't let that stop her. For me, as a member of the LGBTQ community, I can relate to that. I get what that means. We also see that she had some means. As I said, she was in some way being able to have a household, and to have a household back then was a big deal, right? It wasn't just that you went out and bought to have a household meant servants and she would have had to have been able to do that. And she was a righteous Gentile. That meant that she was searching and believed in one God and wanted to be faithful to that. That was very, very different from the Roman culture. So she was going counterculture when it wasn't popular to do so. But she believed in her faith. She was worldly, as I mentioned, and she kept her head in the midst of all that she was exposed to, that could have grabbed her attention and taken her 100 different ways. And the thing that I think I admire most about her is that she was open to the Spirit's calling. She was willing to boldly go where no woman had gone before. She had heard what Paul was saying, and she picked it up, and she got her Esther on, what we just heard about. And she realized that for such a time as this, she recognized God's calling on her life. She was aware of the resources and the gifts and talents that she had been given, and she was willing to yield them to what God wanted. She went all in. I relate to that too. That's what I want to be. For me, this story reinforces that we all, every single one of us, have something that God can use, even if we don't understand it or we see it in ourselves. If we are willing to yield it, God will put it to use. I believe the story of Lydia is one of the most empowering stories in the Bible. She was in the minority, but through prevenient, justifying, and sanctifying grace, God used the purveyor of purple cloth to build the church of Europe. So how does this relate to you and me? That picture that was up there with the face that was blank, it's because we don't know a lot about her. It would be hard to fill in all of the detail about Lydia. But we know that she was involved in creating and selling purple cloth. We know that she went all in. And whatever her personal story and background was, God wasn't holding anything back in the role that she would play in building the church. Friends, this is an amazing story of how God views leadership in the church. Leadership is non-gender specific. It is gender neutral. Regardless of your gender, your race, your sexual persuasion, your age, your name, whatever, we each have gifts and graces that God has blessed us and entrusted us with to be used in building the kingdom. And so, in that respect, we are Lydia. You are her. I am her. And to God be the glory.
Thank you, Alice. I love Lydia got her Esther on. And another story of someone who really faces the obstacles. And again, I know that there are many on this webinar who have faced obstacles. My bad. I said put your questions in chat. You may have noticed you can't do that. And of course, they go in Q&A. So you can begin to put your questions into Q&A. Now I'm going to turn to Denise Smartt-Sears, and she'll tell us about her.
I'm Denise Smartt-Sears, and I'm privileged to be a part of this panel with these faithful sisters. Ruth is one of the most lovable women in the Bible. Her name derives from the Hebrew word ruth, which means friend. For me, Ruth is the embodiment of all that is fine in a young woman. She is compassionate, loving, decisive, and forward-thinking. I aspire to be her. In the midst of her grief for her husband, she is even measured. Ruth does not run back to her father's house for protection, nor does she expect a pity party. She is devoted to her mother-in-law, her other mother, Naomi. Ruth demonstrates her love to Mahlon, her late husband, by the depth of her commitment. She goes with his mother, lives among his people, and honors his God. The bond that women have with one another can be both maternal and sisterly. It's important for me to have women of all ages who understand me and who can offer wisdom and a listening ear. Over the years, I have walked with several women, some from my teenage years, others that I met in undergraduate school, and still those who I met as an adult. God provided me well beyond my dreams with sisters. They are my sister friends. They are my sisters in every way. They have been a source of encouragement through difficult days. They have been there to celebrate the joys. I covet their prayers. They add value to my life. I cherish these relationships. And Ruth knew that bond between her and her other mother. It was well worth the journey. Growing up in the church, the daughter of a Methodist pastor, I had many grandmas and aunts in the congregation. They were known for dropping pearls of wisdom, for their encouragement, and most of all, they were strong Christian models who were devoted to God and family. But it was during my lowest time, after the death of my mother, that these women, those who were biologically related to me and not, stepped up. They stood in the gap. My Aunt Ruth was one of those people. She assisted us with raising our sons. Aunt Ruth was a retired nurse, a gentle soul. She was committed to God and very active in her church. And even though Aunt Ruth had her own children and grandchildren, she found time for me. Her love was evident in the way that she smiled, her laugh, and especially her cooking. She brought a lot of joy into our lives. You see, she was my mother's older sister, and she was a typical big sister to my mother. And actually, Aunt Ruth and I were not particularly close. I saw her often growing up. We spent many Sunday dinners at her home, but I played with her children. But when it was just she and I in my adulthood, those quiet moments alone, that's where our relationship was really nurtured, and her love was poured into me over and over again. I'm so thankful for the gift that she was to me and my family. Like Ruth in the Bible, my Aunt Ruth knew the way. No GPS device needed. You see, Ruth was an immigrant Moab. She stood firm in her understanding of her worth. She was not going to let others keep her in a container. Yes, she was a young widow in a culture that didn't see a place for a woman without a man. The scripture refers to Ruth as the Moabite several times, probably because the Moabites were a despised people. They were looked upon unfavorably by Israel. Ruth, she let her compassion for others win the hearts of the Israelites. She became a model daughter-in-law, just like me. My mother-in-law and I have developed a deep, abiding love for one another. Oftentimes, people think she is my mother because they say we look alike. That mother-daughter relationship is one that evolves over time. We travel together, we go out, just the two of us. And I cherish the memories that we are building together. I know that she always has my back. Like the people of Bethlehem, they took Ruth in as their own. Not because she was brilliant or beautiful, but because of her very nature. She extended herself with a depth of commitment that led others to embrace her. Ruth follows Naomi to her homeland in an act of love. She says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me and more as well, even if death parts me from you. Imagine with me for a moment, Ruth and Naomi journeying some 120 miles to Palestine. They crossed the Arnon and the Jordan, mountains and valleys, on foot and by donkey, walking through desolate territory. In those dark nights, I can hear the conversation that they must have shared with one another, their deepest fears, their loss of their spouses, their memories of growing up, all of these things flooding their minds, and yet they found time to share them. Maybe that's why the book of Ruth is only 4 chapters, because, you know, women, we keep things to ourselves, and so they didn't want to tell the whole story. Maybe they even clung to each other and cried at times. Perhaps they sang the hymn, "Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love." Once they arrived in Naomi's hometown, Ruth devotes her love to her mother. Maybe she had brothers at home, but Naomi had no one to care for her in her old age, and Ruth stood in the gap. Ruth took a low station gathering up the leftovers, and then the romance begins. Boaz went into the fields and saw the pretty young Ruth. Boaz asked who she was, and they freely offered the social commentary. She was the Moabite woman who came with Naomi. Boaz immediately provides Ruth with protection. Boaz was known as a man of high morale. He was a man of God's will. And there it is. Ruth seems to be a willing partner in this seemingly 90-day fiancé. But once again, even in marriage, Ruth honors Naomi by allowing her to be her son Obed's mamala. We know the rest of the story. Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of King David. And the women of Bethlehem gave Ruth the highest praise when they told Naomi that her daughter-in-law's love for her was worth more than 7 sons. And that's spoken from a mama of 2 sons. Every woman needs a sister friend. And I know that there are some Aunt Ruths out there. There are some Sister Ruths out there. You are her. May you have the courage to follow God's prompting on your life, even if it's not the most popular path. Lean into your sister relationships. Honor them with care and respect. Do not give up the opportunity to pour into another sister. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So keep sowing seeds of hope. Our love is our light. Pray earnestly and journey with a sister. It doesn't matter the age. Just journey with her so she knows what it means to claim the victory. Own your strength in the Lord. You are her. You are Ruth in every way.
Thank you, Denise. And, you know, I'm so pleased we were able to have this Women's Summit. And I think given the fact that it's online, more people have been able to participate. But I think the thing we kind of miss is to be with our sister Ruths and develop new relationships of all generations around the coffee table or the coffee urn and lunches. Thank you for reminding us of those friendships. And we find other ways to do that. keep submitting your question and answer or for answers. And then I will now turn to our friend Dale Ginsburg. Welcome.
Thank you. It was 40 years since the Exodus from Egypt, shortly before the Jewish people were to enter the Promised Land. God called Moshe to take a census of the new generation of Israel and commanded the manner in which the land would be divided among the tribes of Israel, and to list all those who were entitled to receive a share in the land. Within this list of over 600,000 liberated from Egypt, you will find the names of the males who were the heads of the 12 tribes and each of their clans. But the group that gathered on the plains of Moab was much larger than 600,000 because the census did not include women and children. One of the purposes of the census was to determine how to distribute the land. Property rights were passed on through the males of each clan. The women were not counted. Thus begins the tale of the daughters of Zelophehad, and an unusual event in which the principal role is played by 5 women. They were sisters, named Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They were the daughters of Zelophehad, who was the 4th generation descendant from the tribe of Manasseh, Joseph's eldest son. Zelophehad had died in the wilderness on his way from Egypt and left no sons, but only the 5 daughters. They must have been very worthy since they are all mentioned by name in the Torah: Milcah, Tirzah, Noah, Hoglah, and Mahlah. Their names are repeated 3 times in the Torah, always in a different order. Our sages say this is because they were equally wise and equally worthy. None was better than the other. They knew well how to expound scripture and were perfectly virtuous, and they loved the land they were about to enter. And so not only did the daughters of Zelophehad receive special mention in the Torah, but a whole portion of the Torah was credited to their good merits. The fact that the book of Numbers closes with them indicates something fundamentally significant. So the Bible goes along recording all the important male leaders in the census until we hit verse 33. Now Zelophehad, son of Hefer, had no sons, but daughters, and the names of the daughters of Zelophehad were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. It's not remarkable that the women are excluded from the census. It is remarkable that 5 women are named in the census. And not only are they named, their speech is recorded. As the Bible states, they stood before Moshe, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korah's faction, which banded together against the Lord, but died for his own sin, and he has left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen." The daughters of Zelophehad boldly approached Moshe before the whole Jewish nation. They were careful to mention that their father was a worthy man, and therefore he had not forfeited his right to share in the Holy Land. The sisters' intelligence is evident from the clear presentation of their case. Commentaries say they did not ask for any personal gain. They requested that the Torah law be fulfilled and that their father get what was rightfully his, a portion of the Holy Land. They knew that the continuity of the family name depended on inheritance of the land. The women stepped out of their comfort zone for the sake of the land and for what was right. But would Moshe, Eliezer, the priest, the leaders, and all the congregation really hear the justice of their claim? As vulnerable women, they had much to lose if the community rejected them. But they spoke out anyway. It would have been much less risky for them to approach Moshe in private and plead with him to work out something special for them. But they understood that their being was connected to the well-being of others. So they made their case in public as a witness and inspiration to all. Indeed, God himself endorsed their argument, saying to Moshe, "The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share to them. Further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a man dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter." The case of the daughters of Zelophehad serves to change the Israelite inheritance law. The sisters filed one of the earliest lawsuits on record. In 1924, the American Bar Association Journal cited Numbers 27, describing the sisters' win as an early declaratory judgment in which the property rights of women are clearly set forth. For the daughters, census taking turned into an opportunity for the redistribution of wealth and the empowerment of women. There have been times in American history when it has been clear that the census can be used similarly, just as it can be used to minimize and disregard those on the margins. Today, we can put our own counting toward various ends: for women, for the dispossessed, for immigrants, for the precariously housed, for LGBTQ people, for all of us. Our counting can advance the rights of all. I have spent most of my life motivated by the Jewish mantra of Tikkun Olam, repair the world. It is who I am and what I do. And for me, that is what the story of the daughters of Zelophehad is all about. A world in which all men and women are equal. A few years ago, I had the honor of talking with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and holding her hand for a moment. I felt I was in the presence of a tzaddik, a righteous person. I would like to end with a few quotes and thoughts from my heroine. Men and women are persons of equal dignity, and they should count equally before the law. God stated this in his answer to Moshe regarding the daughters of Zelophehad. Do something to make your society a little better. Real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time. She said, move things forward. She seized the moment to change society. The 5 daughters did that as well. These 5 women were some of the world's first fighters for the rights of women. Today, they symbolize the challenges faced by women who refuse to be second-class citizens because of gender inequality. They were blessed because they gathered the courage to confront something that was unjust and to make it right. They dared to challenge something in their world that they knew was inequitable. They pushed to make it right, and they made a difference. They practiced Tikkun Olam.
And as I've known you, Dale, over the last number of years, I know that Tikkun Olam is what motivates you in your faith and work. We thank you for that, and thank you for sharing about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And now we will turn to our 6th panelist, Nathalie Parker.
I am so excited to share with you all today the unlikely shero that I chose to talk about. And her name is Rahab. And we see Rahab in two particular texts in the Bible. We see her in the Old Testament in Joshua 2, and then we see just her name in the Gospel found in Matthew. And what really resonated with me when we talk about Rahab is the fact that, you know, she doesn't fit into the mold or the spectrum of what we would consider the likely shero. She doesn't fit into the mold of what the perfect woman is. And that really resonated with me because I don't necessarily fit in that mold of what society says the ideal woman is. I'm African American. I'm the child of immigrants. I'm from the inner city. I'm the product of a single parent home. And there's all of these boxes that are checked that can categorize me as not the ideal woman. And maybe you can resonate with that. Maybe you can understand what that feels like at times to walk into whether it's a community or a situation and not have all the right boxes checked. But what really is profound about Rahab is that in light of all of her past mistakes or what others may see as missteps, she had the courage and the boldness to step into who God was calling her to be at one of the most important moments in not only biblical text, but I think in the particular societal context that she was in. You see, Rahab is called or categorized as the harlot of Jericho. And one thing about her is that she was literally positioned on a wall. I want us to understand the significance of that wall because in that biblical and historical context, walls were very important. Walls were built to protect cities. The higher and stronger the wall, the more that it represented the ability for that community, for that society to be protected, as well as to be considered a bustling environment. And so her location of that wall was important, not only because of what the wall stood for, but also because of what we see her classified as. That meant that if people were coming in and out, she was the first person to be able to see them. That means that because of her location, she was able to not only protect her family, but she was also able to provide key intel for who we see in this text in Joshua 2, particularly the 15th verse. And so we see Caleb and Joshua, the young spies, right? We're talking about unlikely sheroes. They are the unlikely heroes in this text because of their age. They're the next generation of Israelites who, although many spies were sent into the land to see if it can be possessed so that they can obtain God's promise, only these two young men came back and said it was possible. Can I assure you today that no matter where you are in life's journey, no matter what your situation and circumstance is, sometimes when things seem impossible, that is the time that the Spirit of God can raise up inside of you to let you know, not that it's impossible, but I'm possible. These men come back and say, I heard the other reports, but we do believe that this promised land, that this thing that has been spoken to our people, that this freedom, that this road that we have gone through for all of these years, this is the place that we can possess. But the problem is they weren't big enough. They weren't strong enough. They were no match for that city beyond that big wall. But there was a unlikely shero, a harlot as they call her, who said, listen, I see and understand what God has promised you, and I believe I can be of some assistance. does Rahab think she is? Doesn't she know her qualifications? Doesn't she know what they say about her? What about Rahab allowed her to have the audacity and the resilience to say in that moment, I can help you. I can be a part of God's grand plan and desire for not only your nation, but for my family, for my community, and ultimately her decision and choice to be bold and audacious and resilient will ultimately show us in the New Testament what her life means to all of us, even now in the world. You see, many scholars and theologians demonize Rahab because of her past experiences and what we may deem as her missteps and her misfortunes. But what's really interesting is that position on the wall, those mistakes, those experiences that we may deem as inappropriate or not good enough, those experiences prepared her for one amazing moment in time. You see, I'm the youngest of 5 boys. Yes, please say a prayer for me. And so I grew up, and often the things that my brothers could do, I couldn't do. They can stay out late. I had a curfew that was way too early. They started dating way earlier than I did. And those experiences made me really cling to church. Man, it was my youth group that allowed me to practice to speak in public. It was my Sunday school teacher that gave me the privilege on one Sunday to teach a Sunday school, even though I wasn't qualified. It was my experience going to the public community center that put in my heart the passion to serve my community and to be now the woman that God has called me to be. You see, Rahab may not have had the best past, but her experience on sitting on that wall prepared her for this moment in time. And no matter who you are, all of your experiences, good, bad, indifferent, have prepared you for this moment in time. I know it's difficult. We're experiencing a global pandemic, a global racial justice movement for social equality and equity for not only race, but gender and all of those things. Are you like Rahab? Are your experiences positioning you at this critical moment in time to make a decision, not to run away from your experiences, but to embody them with a bold sense that God has called you at this moment to lead? You see, I believe that Rahab shows us something on that wall. Oh, it's more than just the place that she lived. It's more than just the place that she ran into spies. It was the moment that she had to step into who God was calling her to be and change the trajectory of her life. And so there's 3 things that I really think are important about this story in Rahab. As a program coordinator for the National Network of Young Adults, there's 3 principles that resonate with us. We say that no matter how dark it is, we need to stay lit. So lit are our principles for leadership, innovation, and transformation. Leadership, innovation, and transformation. So Rahab embodies these things in the text. She shows us leadership. Her name means expansive. What an interesting dichotomy that as she is on this big wall, her very name embodies what it is. She is expansive. We don't get too much of who she is, the complexities of her story, of her narrative, but we see that she steps in to lead 2 people who might not be the likely followers that Rahab would have on any other given day. And as she steps into this leadership, she understands that this is a critical time for her family, for the people of Israel, and ultimately in the world. And so I believe that she embodied leadership because she understood that as much as it was about her decision, it was really more about others. You see, Rahab, I believe, was a Psalms 46:5 woman. And that verse says, God is within her. She will not fail. I'm sure she didn't know what would happen. This was definitely a risk. First of all, she shouldn't be talking to those men. Second of all, there were spies. Third of all, she was compromising the rules that were put before her. But she stepped into that leadership and knew that at this time and in this moment, God has called me to lead. And as long as God has called me, I will not fail. The second thing she shows us is innovation, that not only do the old boys club get to have fun, she shows us that a woman can redefine what it means to lead, and a woman can also be the hero of a story that will remake not only her story, but the story of history. There's one thing that I want to share with you about innovation. And this is a quote from my book, Transformation Starts With Me. Innovation cannot be comfortable because it demands both sacrifice and change. Sacrifice is required because it demands letting go of the familiar, the routine, and the safe. Change is required because it takes the foundation of what has always been and it inserts rapid transformations to create something radically new. Innovation is a risk, but a worthy one when calculated correctly. I believe that Rahab calculated her risk. I believe she understood that this moment may take her life, but it was a risk that she was willing to make because something had to change. Which brings us to the last, transformation. God has called us to be disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And transformation, though it sounds amazing, comes at risk, comes with sacrifice, comes with letting go, comes with doing things anew, afresh, and hearing the voices of those who are sometimes in the margins and are our unlikely heroes and sheroes. And because of Rahab's unlikely heroicness, because of her ability to take this risk, when we go to Matthew, we see this great lineage of Jesus Christ. And there are all of these names of men and patriarchs. And sprinkled in the mix of that lovely genealogy that brings us our Savior, our Messiah, we see this name, Rahab, one of few women who made the cut. And so I want to encourage you today that that is transformation, that you are called at this moment, at this time, and you are prepared with everything that you have experienced to answer God's call and to be the transformation that God is requiring us in the world. And guess what? Transformation starts with you.
All right, a couple of questions. One is directed at Juyeon, and it is that, what do you do? How do people really, what's the current situation of female ministers in the church where people have made them feel that they're not where they're supposed to be? Now, we all know that when you're appointed to a local church, they're not always as accepting of a woman, and particularly a woman of color. Juyeon, do you want to say a few things about that? Be sure and unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question. I served two churches since I was commissioned as a provisional elder. And thanks to Bishop, our own Bishop in Northern Inland Conference, not because she's here with us. I just want to say thank you, and for the cabinet, because so far I am grateful for my congregations who are very respectful and want to know my culture and history. And I think ministry is never, I think, comfortable, right? But it has been comfortable enough for me to be myself so far. But I know there are other places, you know, and it is more like, the thing is that it's not very much of direct speaking, you know, aggressively, you know, speaking to me directly like the pastor that I shared. But it is more like assumptions and prejudice and clear, you know, ceiling that is given to all women. You know, I don't know, there might be some members who decide not to come to church because of my gender and race. But I think I will say, bad for them, bad for them, because I think, you know, they are missing the opportunity to extend their understanding of God's people and the world, and you know, racial and gender issues. So, I mean, from my experience so far, I'm feeling okay now, but I'm always cautious of these issues. But I am, like I'm saying, you know, I am, you know, moving forward regardless. Yeah, that's where I am. Yeah, and I'm glad to have wonderful colleagues who will support me to be in ministry. Yeah.
Thank you, and I always appreciate the ministry that you do for all of us. Is there somebody else on the panel that wants to quickly answer that question? Denise, do you want to give a shot at it?
I think the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I find it, it's still a difficult uphill climb. As a superintendent, I encounter churches that often say, we had a woman already, so we're done with that. They say that the same thing about maybe a Black person or an Asian person as well. And so we are really in a space where we're trying to educate our people so that they really can see beyond where they are and be open to God's moving in their life and especially in their communities. I can remember, let's see, when I was a deacon, you know, the old track of a deacon, a provisional elder, when I was in the other room and the SPRC was having the conversation with the district superintendent. And they said, we don't want her, you know, she's too weak. We need someone strong and much more mature, you know, older is what they meant, to be our pastor. And they had to take me anyway. So, you know, we ended up working very well together. And then they learned to accept me because I didn't change from being a woman or a Black person, and to grow together. But it takes time, and it takes a lot of endurance and a lot of praying.
Yes, and you know, having been in active ministry for over 40 years, like you say, Denise, some things don't change. Sometimes it's still a struggle. And whether you're relatively new, like Juyeon, or along the path as you, or almost ready to retire, it's been part of the journey for all of us. So thank you for sharing a little bit. We had a question that was directed to Dale about what the Jewish mantra is that you referenced, and a little bit more about what it means and what it means to you. Dale?
The Hebrew is tikkun olam, and the translation is to repair the world. But that for Jews encompasses so much more. It's saving the world. It involves social justice, climate change, caring for the underprivileged, and as part of our being known sometimes as the chosen people, that is what the chosen part is all about. It's about having we are chosen to have this responsibility. It is something that we should do. and we must do in our lives. And so when I said I'm motivated by that, I don't know when I learned about this, where I incorporated it into myself, but I think more and more the Jewish community talks about and cares about Tikkun Olam. It is our obligation to try and make things better.
Thank you, Dale. As United Methodists, well, I've always appreciated that understanding of to repair or heal the world. And as United Methodists, we have, we talk about it in terms of social holiness, that we're called to work for justice wherever we are. And so we connect on that in terms of, that's why we have faith, so that we can make a difference and make the world better. And there's always a lot of work to be done, as you well know. So we work side by side, hand to hand, in trying to make and repair the world. We just have a minute or two, and so I am just going to go around the circle. I know they've put in some of it in the chat, but I just want to make sure that there's been a request that each of the panelists give their name and the location of where you live. So I'll go around again, and Juyeon, why don't you give your name and where you live and serve?
Yeah, my name is Julian Zhang, Juyeon. Actually, my last name is somewhere here and there. It's like Jung, but it's my last name is Jeon. And I live in Genoa, Illinois, serving Genoa Faith United Methodist Church. Yeah, that's where I am. Yeah.
Thank you. And Kim?
I am Kim Simpson. I'm a laywoman. I serve through the Central Texas Conference, and I live in Arlington, Texas. It's between Fort Worth and Dallas.
All right, thank you. Alice Williams?
Hi, my name is Alice Williams, and I am a lay leader for the Florida Annual Conference, living in Orlando, Florida, the home of sunshine and theme parks.
Somehow I have this connection between Lydia and Disneyland now that I just got to get out. Denise.
I'm Denise Smartt-Sears, and I'm from the New York Annual Conference. I'm a district superintendent of the metropolitan area.
Great. Dale?
I'm Dale Ginsberg. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and I can walk to the Chicago Temple.
That's right. Nathalie Parker.
I am Nathalie Nelson Parker. I am clergy with the North Georgia Conference, serving at Strengthening the Black Church for the 21st Century in Nashville, Tennessee.
I want to thank this panelists. They're just fabulous. I thank you each for just sharing your faith and sharing who you are and bringing this to everybody. Thank you, Don, for inviting us, and we appreciate that you entrusted this time to us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.